Alan Watts once said that what you are basically, deep down, is simply the fabric and structure of existence itself. Did you know that deep down, the atoms which make up our bodies were created in the heart of a star billions of years ago? It's mind-blowing to think about how we are literally made of stardust and how this lifetime that we're sharing has been billions of years in the making. You may have heard the expression that we are the universe experiencing itself through itself, and it's true. From a bigger picture perspective, it's clear that we are all interconnected in the web of life. We're all expressions of the infinite. And in that way, we are all one. And it's interesting to note that this idea of oneness is not just scientific. This is also one of the most fundamental realizations or insights on the path of spiritual awakening. Science generally doesn't associate itself with spirituality, but can we bring together these two worlds? Is it possible to awaken spiritually while still being grounded in science and rationality? To me, the answer is absolutely yes. And to explore why, in this video, we're going to discuss the idea of cosmic consciousness. And I'm going to share some scientific evidence that there is more to what we are than a physical human body. So let's get started. Welcome back to Cosmic Consciousness. My name is Jonas, and here on this channel, I attempt to bridge the gap between science and spirituality, because I believe that spiritual wisdom holds the key to the healing and awakening that humanity needs right now. Science tells us that the universe started 13.7 billion years ago in an event known as the Big Bang. And looking at the history of the universe is an easy way to visualize the oneness of all things. Because everything in this universe began as one. Everything emerged out of the same source. All the stars and the planets and the galaxies and you and I all began in a single point of energy that was 1 billion times smaller than a single atom. And that is the oneness of all things. New scientific discoveries in the field of quantum physics have repeatedly demonstrated that there is an underlying unity to all things that is always present. In the Tao of Physics, Fritjof Capra states, "Quantum theory forces us to see the universe not as a collection of physical objects, but rather as a complicated web of relations between the various parts of a unified whole." This is what's known as unified field theory.
And what we've discovered at the core basis of the universe, the foundation of the universe, is a single universal field of intelligence, a field which unites gravity with electromagnetism, light, with radioactivity, with the nuclear force, so that all the forces of nature and all the so-called particles of nature, quarks, leptons, protons, neutrons, are now understood to be one. They're all just different ripples on a single ocean of existence. That's called the unified field or superstring field.
And it's interesting to note again that this idea of oneness is not just scientific. This is the core teaching that is found in all of the world's major spiritual and religious traditions. Jesus once said, "Father, you and I are one." Rumi said, "We are one, everything in the universe is within." Muhammad said, "Whoever knows himself knows his Lord." Buddhism teaches, "Look inside, all living beings possess the Buddha nature." In the Bhagavad Gita, it's stated that God dwells in you as you. Even Confucianism states, "Heaven, earth, and humans are the same." These quotes come from thousands of years ago, and yet science has only caught up to this understanding in the past 100 years. Now it stands to reason that if we are all one with the infinite, if we are all expressions of the infinite cosmos, then there must be something to what we are that is infinite as well. And this is the idea of cosmic consciousness, the idea that the consciousness at the very core of our being, the pure awareness, the life force, the spark of life within each one of us, is part of this infinite unified field. And in that way, it's transcendent. It exists beyond this one human lifetime. It exists beyond the physical human body. In other words, consciousness is cosmic. Now, mainstream science disagrees with that idea. Mainstream science tells us that consciousness is produced by the interaction of neurons in the physical brain, and that there is no consciousness outside of the physical brain. This is often taught to us in our schools as a scientific fact, but it's not a fact. It's a theory. The fact of the matter is that no one knows, and consciousness is a complete mystery. Science has spent decades grappling with what's known as the hard problem of consciousness, which goes as follows. If the atoms and neutrons and protons and electrons that make up our brains don't have any consciousness, then how can a collection of mindless particles somehow yield a mindful experience? In other words, why isn't all of this brain activity just happening in the dark with no one here to perceive it? Even as we get a better understanding of how the brain works, we still have no answer for this hard problem of consciousness, and this has led some leading researchers and scientists to suggest that we need to fundamentally rethink our understanding of consciousness.
Physicists sometimes take some aspects of the universe as fundamental building blocks: space and time and mass. If you can't explain consciousness in terms of the existing fundamentals, space, time, mass, charge, then as a matter of logic, you need to expand the list. The natural thing to do is to postulate consciousness itself as something fundamental, a fundamental building block of nature.
If we compare the brain to a computer needs electricity to run, and yet the computer doesn't generate the electrical force which powers it. The electricity exists independently of any one computer, right? Obviously. And likewise, couldn't it be possible that the brain biocomputer doesn't generate the consciousness that animates it and gives it life? Isn't it possible that the consciousness exists independently of the physical brain? All of our advancements in quantum physics are supporting this idea that consciousness exists non-locally. Meaning it exists beyond the physical brain. It exists outside of space and time altogether.
Consciousness can enter quantum physics to collapse the possibilities into actuality only if, now listen to this, consciousness is transcendent, consciousness is unitive, one consciousness only, and consciousness is us. We are that consciousness. And this is a fairly spiritual view of the world.
At the basis of all life's diversity, there is unity. At our basis, you and I are one. And that unity at the basis of mind and matter is consciousness, universal consciousness. So with that deep understanding that consciousness isn't created by the brain, it's not purely an outcome of molecular chemical processes in the brain, but is fundamental in nature. It's the very core of nature. We call it the unified field.
For me, there can't even have been an origin of the universe unless there was some consciousness there to perceive it coming into being. This is a lesson that all physicists eventually are coming to, if not the majority by now, certainly a sizable minority, who believe that consciousness must enter into the field of physics in a direct way through something called the observer effect. If the Big Bang, supposedly the thing that Hawking and Penrose are arguing about, occurred out of nothing and produced a material universe, then there had to have been quantum mechanics operating at the moment of the Big Bang, and that means there had to have been an observer present, and this is where I bring in the whole question of the soul.
Clearly, there is more to the mystery of consciousness than we currently understand. There's more to the mystery of what we are than we currently understand. And the more that we learn, the deeper that we delve, the more that these lines between science and spirituality are being blurred. Now lastly, I want to touch on research into near-death experiences because, as I've discussed in previous videos, this is one of the largest bodies of concrete scientific evidence that there is more to the mystery of consciousness than we understand, and consciousness very well may continue after the death of the physical body and brain. Recently, the largest ever study into near-death experiences surveyed 2,000 people from 15 different hospitals who had been resuscitated after being labeled clinically dead. In this study, 40% of people reported that they continued to be aware minutes or even hours after their heart had stopped beating and their brain had shut down. In other words, while these people were in the hospital and hooked up to this medical equipment, there was no electrical brain activity happening whatsoever. And yet this study documented multiple cases where people accurately described events happening in the hospital room during a period where the brain was fully shut down and the heart had stopped beating.
Here I am as a physician who's actually studied near-death experiences and making an amazing claim that the evidence is so strong that certainly to me it proves the existence of an afterlife. There's absolutely no medical explanation, even theoretically possible, for having a cardiac arrest, having your heart stop, and being under general anesthesia, and having these incredibly detailed, lucid, vivid, dramatic near-death experiences, especially if these near-death experiences occurring under such extreme situations are the same exact content of experiences that happen to all other near-death experiencers.
Research also indicates that more than 10 million people have had a near-death experience in the United States alone, with millions more all over the globe. All over the world, regardless of social or cultural background, people describe these near-death experiences in very similar terms. And the question is, if there are millions and millions of people from all over the world who are all describing these out-of-body near-death experiences in the same way, are these really all hallucinations, or is there more truth to these experiences than we currently understand? Maybe it's time that we rethink some of our basic scientific assumptions about the nature of consciousness, about life and death. Maybe it's time for a new scientific revolution around the study of consciousness, where we open to this possibility that consciousness is not produced by the brain, that there is more to what we are than a physical human body. I believe that is the way of the future, a new scientific paradigm where we bring in this ancient wisdom of our ancestors, that there is more to what we are than a physical human body. And in fact, we are multidimensional beings living in a multidimensional cosmos that is way more incredible than anything we can even begin to imagine. Thank you so much for joining me here, and I'll see you in the next video.